Welcome to New Covenant Ministries International Leadership Roundtable. We are talking about transition. I'm Tim Heil. I'm here with Tyrone Daniel, who leads NCMI, as well as Terry Kreuger, who's on the NCMI team. But what's unique here is that Tyrone planted our church, Redemption City Church, and he actually handed it over to TK. I'm in the church as well, a part of the eldership team, and we're talking about transition. And in the previous segments, we talked why transition, who to transition to, kind of what are we looking for when we transition, and now we're getting into a little more nitty-gritty in how to transition. So welcome in again, guys, and let's talk about it. How do we transition once we've determined, okay, we want to do that, we have a feeling as to who, now how?
Well, this is the $1,000,000 question, isn't it? So Tim, appreciate you kind of asking us these things. I think just to reiterate what we've said in the last two segments is that we are not experts in this. We don't claim to be. But by the grace of God, we've got 30-something years history in transition. And we've seen some really good stuff happen. Sadly, we've seen some really bad transitions. So we're trying to learn in this. And again, we speaking on our experience, but we're not being prescriptive. We're actually trying to be more descriptive and help us all in our journey. So it's not just for church leadership, it's for anything that you're involved in, which we covered in the first session. So please be aware of that. And again, the downside in what we're doing here is that actually there are so many transitions and there's so many ways. So I think when it comes to the how, it's a never-ending process and we could spend a long, long time. So we're going to try and be brief and obviously cover how we've done what we've done, but please don't let it limit you, let it kind of stir you to trust God and finding God how to do this, but stick to the plan and God's ways. And so just so we can say around that, and you know, there are different ways, as I said, in transitioning. I think the best way to understand is that there's stages in transition. How do you transition? Well, you've got to understand there's stages. Not just one thing happens and it's all going to boom, there it is. It's stages. I think if we can understand the seasons, we can understand the reasons. And in that, it helps us make our decisions and how we transition. So, for instance, you can bring someone from the outside to take over and transition. That's very different to bringing someone from within. And how you go about that, obviously, is determined very differently, and how they respond, how people react, and so on. And so, I think still plan A, the ideal is always if you can bring someone from within. But don't let that kind of get you to hold on too long or stick to or hand over to the wrong person. There are ways, and it has worked many times really well, bring in the right guy. It's God's way to get people from outside to come and be involved and help us in the bigger picture and to challenge some of the culture and so on. So neither are right or wrong, but depending on how you go about it, what God says determines how we transition. I think, but in all of it, I think, from my take, from understanding, there are four seasons, four stages to transition, I think. And again, I don't want to get caught up in it, but it just helps us process. The first one, I believe, is revelation. And God begins to speak to the guy who's leading, whatever the ministry, the church, or whatever it is. He begins to speak to you and you begin to, and however he does that, I think back to be honest, I always knew that we're planning this for the next guy and so on, but I never was ready to hand it over. And we were enjoying both, really, leading NCMI and the church. We had a great team around, so it was doable. And my dad came and visited us from Australia, and he was in the elders meeting. I asked him, would you come address us elders? We all sit in there with our wives, and he's teaching. And then out of the blue, he just offends me by throwing out, I'm not sure how much longer Tyrone can do this. And I was like, thanks a lot. Excuse me, how about we have that conversation without? And I was like, this is not the time or the season, I'm not ready for this. But actually, I do feel that he helped not sow the seed of doubt, but actually get me to think, actually, it's not forever. Although you're building away from yourself, there is this season coming. And so it was using that God began to speak. And again, that's not how he'll do it for us, all of us, but that is just somewhat of revelation. Okay, your season, your timing, it's becoming. The cloud, God's beginning to speak. The cloud is moving. I think that's good to see. You can't move the cloud, but when it moves, you better start moving with it. God is saying stuff, and there's a confirmation. It's almost like the green light. It's now time to begin to process more than from a distance, be a little more proactive and intentional in not just building away from yourself, now building towards the next guy. And so I think it's that. So for me, revelation first. Secondly is confirmation, and that's or confrontation. Confrontation. This is probably the most difficult, and in it, things are on pause. So a lot of the decisions we're trying to make, a lot of the stuff you want to happen as the leader of the church and all that, suddenly it's all now on pause because you realize that you're making decisions that have ramifications not just in the future, but now for the next guy.
Yeah.
And to be honest, it's the most frustrating time of all because you want to bring leaders on, but you shouldn't bring leaders on if you're going to bring a new leader on to lead. He should choose his team. Facilities, buildings, we had all these kind of questions that were there. It almost felt like there's this holy frustration. I felt it, others were feeling it, the church was feeling it. And those are good things. They're not bad things like what's wrong. It's more like God's trying to get our attention and actually prepare hearts for something.
So when you say things are on pause, so, I in my mind, I thought of that phrase that you hear a lot of times in corporate America, well, it's business as usual until, blah, blah, blah. And so are you saying it's not business as usual?
Well, I'm not using the word business, but it is business as usual, but it's not long-term decisions to be made by that guy anymore. When it's no longer one day, it's soon, you have to then begin to say, okay, I'm setting the next guy up for victory. And the way to do that is let the next guy put all the good things you would like to have put in place to make you look good when you leave. Actually, now it's no longer your call. So facilities, which is a big deal, choosing of buildings, long-term leases or buildings or buying buildings, bringing on leadership of any capacity. And we trained, in our context, we trained a whole lot of elders, including you, to come on under my watch, but realize actually there's not timing right now because the next guys actually should choose who he wants. Although we were talking about who I want and he agreed, it was now his decision to bring them on. And so I had to pause all that, which caused other frustrations. And so it's still business, it's still kingdom, it's still pioneering the vision, but now you're realizing the next guy is actually the guy who has to make those calls, which brought it on quicker for us. It's almost like we're treading water. So we're doing the same, but it's like, I'm just saying this is how it worked for us. I'm not saying it has to be for everyone. Can I add this too, that the worst time to hand over your church is when it's failing. That's the downside. A lot of guys are like, okay, my season's over, my grace is lifted, the church is on a dive, I better find someone else. Actually, the best time to hand over the church, if we're serious about setting the next generation up or the next guy, is when the church is doing really well. So, a lot of guys are, well, when the church is doing bad, that's my time. No, when it's doing well, God usually says, okay, now's your time, So it's treading water, the grace is lifting. As I said earlier, just to be serious, not that it's a bad thing, but my global context is pretty big, and it's a lot of involvement that have nations and decisions that impact nations and regions. And I remember sitting in one of our staff meetings, and there's nothing wrong with this because this is what our job is as a lead guy. But I remember one of the elders' wives asking me the question, and my mind's in this context of what's happening in another country, and big deal, the guys are waiting for a response. And she, in our meeting, was like, how many donuts do you need for Sunday? And I, honestly, I had asked that question many times before, but this time I realized my season of leading this church is done. And it's not it's not like it was a wrong question. I just realized my grace to do this is no longer here. Their grace to receive this from me is lifting, the people's grace. And that's not a bad thing. It's actually a godly thing. Otherwise, transition wouldn't work. And so to understand the grace, dealing with stuff that might not be me as well. So, we're having to make decisions now that are not my decisions. It's not the next guy with the elders and so on. And so I think if we can understand confrontation, and then if things become confrontational, not that we at each other, but there's some frustration. It's part of the revelation now becoming a confrontation. And then there's this transformation, where it becomes clear who the guys and who they are, and others begin to see that something needs to happen. And so I went to our elders and began chatting to them. Hey, do you guys feel? And they're all like, yeah, season, pray, we feel right. They were brutally honest and straight. If you're not secure, you'd be like, but the guys were straight. Yeah, I feel like your gifting is needing to be released out to the globe right now. And locally, we need someone who's more local. And so if you ask, you're going to get the answer if you've got good leaders around. But you better be ready for the answers. Right. But it's clearer and becomes clearer. And when everyone owns it, this thing can really go well. Becomes more obvious, not just hearing it, now we begin to see it. So it starts with hearing, God speaks to us, now we begin to see. And then lastly is manifestation. And actually the transition happens and how we go about doing it, which I'd love to talk about in a moment. But let me let TK obviously into this convo. Go, bro.
No, I think that was great. It's the flip side of that. For the local eldership team. I think you do go through all of those things that you mentioned. You know, there is the initial like, you know, when the guy says, man, I think my season's drawing to an end, there's the initial like, you know, what does that all mean for our future? But to be honest with you, I want to come back to this thing again and again and again. If you're all hearing God together, there's a sense of the rightness in God, even when there isn't, you know, you're looking at that, and I'm talking about the early part of that conversation. You're like, okay, we don't know really what this looks like, but we know we can trust God, because God has always been good to us. God has always been kind to us. And so is taken out by the man. Let's just press into God and trust that God's going to lead us.
Yeah, I think in the how, you know, as we said earlier, it's not a one size fits all, and it's determined on whether you're bringing someone in or if it's someone with them. But if you do have a team, as in a local church, let's say for example, and you have an eldership team, the key is to get the team on board. If the team's not on board, this thing's going to go real bad. So you don't have to get agreement and everyone but you've got to work with your team before you start working with others. And that's also the understanding where you partner with NCMI, that this isn't a lone journey of just every local church. It's actually guys coming in and speaking in and helping in transition and helping identify, helping bring through, helping talk about stuff that the guy who's handing over or the guy who's taking over can't really talk about. But it's answering the questions and talking through the stuff and bringing outside accountability that's best for the sheep, seeing stuff that you don't see when you're in it, which that's the blind spots we all have.
Well, if I could ask, you know, you mentioned having the team on board. I imagine there's some people watching or listening, perhaps they went through a pretty bad experience where the team wasn't on board, and not that this happened behind the scenes at Redemption City, but perhaps you've been in a situation, or obviously you hear stories from other people, and maybe there's people watching or listening that, man, I had one guy or two that thought it should have been them, or the team wasn't on board, and have you ever had to deal with that, and what does that look like?
Yeah, well, again, I don't want to let me just be vague and say this. There were guys in my context through life that felt they were the guy even though they weren't. And so we had to work through that. That's a reality. And so that's what I mean when you got to get the team on board. You've got to process this thing. It's not, I've made a decision, this is what we're doing. If you believe in eldership governed, it doesn't mean the lead guy's the boss. You're not. You're the captain and you play a team. And if the elders aren't on board, then let me just back up and say it can be for certain reasons. Number one, it could be that they have ambition, they want to lead it, and they're going to have to work through that. Or number two, which happens too, is that maybe God's speaking to you, but the timing's not right. Because if, let's say we had 7 elders at that stage, including me, if I felt it and other 6 weren't feeling that time was, then maybe it's not that I haven't heard God, just my timing's off, let's hold back. Not to get them all on board, but the majority should be on board. If it's you trying to fight everyone, it's never going to happen. So it can be timing, it can be ambition, it can be just initial shock. Or surprise, which we all face because it's personal and it's kind of emotional, and we're so relational in how we build that people do kind of get, well, what's this going to look like? I'm only here because you're here now. What does that mean for me? And so that's why if you're a good leader, I'm just saying you've got to process this with your team slowly. And let me tell you, there are times, Tim, where you've got to do it privately with one-on-one with guys. It's unfair to bring it out into the open who the guy is when you've never talked to the individuals. Because the way they react is going to sink the guy. Because some people don't know how to react. And what about me? And I didn't think him. Now, we never did that, because I never actually spoke to TK once about him being the guy. But I talked to every other elder about TK being the guy. So we got that stuff sorted. So when I announced it in our elders meetings, first time he ever heard he was the guy was the day I said, he's the guy taking over. And I left with
but just to balance that time, because I think you used the word there, process, which was important, you know, and it did take us 2 or 3 months to get to that place.
Oh, no, absolutely.
You know, so like I say, the first part of the conversation was, gee, I feel like God's speaking to me about giving me the green light to start the transition process.
Absolutely.
So it wasn't like, God's giving me the green light, this is the guy.
No.
Because that is when that shock factor can kick in, and that's when, so I don't think this is a process. I think we hear God, but it's still not a process that we can rush.
You can't rush it.
Because that'll be a shock to the team, to the church, to everybody, you know.
Yeah, and even if God's in it, the point being it's going to be a process. And the problem with visionary guys is when they heard God, they want it to happen. And that was my thing. Okay, you spoke, and let's get it done next season. Not because I was over it, I just wanted to move into the next. But I also realized for the sake of the sheep and for this to go right, guys have to process, and they process different. So some guys had to sit with more and hear from them, and not arm wrestle them, just help them see it's not them, and actually it's this, and they came round. I didn't convince them, they were just able to chew it through with me. So they were like, yeah, this is a good thing. And I think other guys were like, yeah, it's good, let's get it done. And so that's somehow, I think, Tim, when you're saying it's gone really bad, it's because guys haven't handled it well or done it well. And I think you owe it to the guy you're handing over to actually deal with the stuff. So he doesn't have to. And then again, while it's eldership govern, if you've heard God and you want to process and pray, at the end of the day, you want everyone to get on board eventually. But if they don't, it doesn't mean it shouldn't happen. At the end of the day, you're not handing it over to the guy who doesn't want this to happen. You're handing over to what you believe. And so there comes a time, this sounds harsh, but for the sake of the sheep, that guy either has to get on board or get off. That sounds harsh, but actually if we care about the sheep, it's not about what you think, it's about us hearing God. If the majority of guys are on board and feel this is God, and one's not willing, I believe the how is the guy leading the church, who's handing it over, should then step that guy off the eldership. So he doesn't have to come in and take on a team that doesn't want to be with him.
Right.
So you do all the dirty work, but hopefully the guy can be restored, or hopefully he can come round, or maybe he's looking for his season to be released. And so you do it honorable, everything we talked about, redemption and grace, get all that. You want everyone to be on board, but they got to want to be on board. And you can't go on a vote. It's got to be hearing God together, and that's why you got to have the right elders in place. But if God's in it, he does begin to process, and you begin to feel it. And maybe as a visionary, you articulate what they're feeling, and they go, yeah, that's what we're feeling. And so we had prophetic words from people outside the church, in the church. It was just the green light, it's the time, and we began the process of getting the team on board. And again, not convincing them, getting them to hear God. So as TK said, I got the girls, elders and their wives together, and I said, I feel like the season is green light now. I'm asking you please to go pray and process. Not my decisions, they're our decisions. So I didn't say, hey, this is right. I said, go pray about it, pray. Let's process, and gave him a couple of months around that. So it wasn't like, hey, this is what we're doing. And I think if you go to God and you're serious, God will actually speak to you because he cares about those sheep. And if he wants this transition to happen, like we said in the beginning, then he's going to confirm stuff if you're just willing to put your agenda aside and say, okay, Lord, what is it in what you're saying? So I think it's very key for the team to be on board, because how they respond publicly and privately will determine how the people are. And so I know that when I make an announcement publicly, the first people the church or the people look at are the team.
Absolutely.
How they respond. And if they like cheering it, and not fake, but they've worked through their stuff, the people will buy into it. If there's anyone doubting or putting off, saying, I didn't want that to happen, I mean, that's just undermining, and this thing goes really bad. So that's why you've got to process this and get the guys on board and work it out. But there is a time, again, I just got to reiterate, you can't wait till everyone's on board 6 years when the church is finished. You've got to say, guys, we have to trust you. Just got to trust me. And at the end of the day, let's hear God together. And you know, like Tika said, it's easy when you hand over church and leave, because then like, good luck. But when you're actually going to say, look, I'm going to stay in this church, that's how much I believe in this. I'm not asking you to do something I'm not. I'm backing the guy by actually being here. And then you can trust that a whole lot more than just see you later, good luck, and we'll see you in heaven. You know? So it doesn't mean that every guy has to hand over and stay. But I do think the guy handing over should ask that question, would he be willing to follow or stay?
Exactly. It's a great question.
And if he's not, then geez, how can you expect others? You know? So I think it's just that process of working through. And I know guys right now who've been on the phone to me who are working this stuff out right now. And they've said, no, we'll just make a big announcement. I'm like, no, you better sit with the other elders and get them to give their issues,
there's a process,
rather than the guy hears it and he's sunk. Because if I know, and I'm just going to be honest with you, Tim, I mean, some of the transition I've had, we've been involved in where I've been handed stuff. Guys have let me know they should be the guy. It's made it very difficult for me, and it's life. But it's hard to lead a guy who tells me he should be the guy leading. You know, so it's not hide it and cover it, and it's not this right or wrong, but there's a better way of doing it, is we can sort that stuff out so the new guy doesn't have to carry all that.
Absolutely.
You know, so that's what I mean about team. Anything you want to say around team on board? Or?
Absolutely.
Obviously, there's no prescribed time frame or timeline. And I don't recall the official timeline of what you guys had, but yeah, let's talk through that. You know, what does that look like, and what was that process like for you guys?
Well, I've got a lot to say. Let me hear, TK, you throw out, again, not even just your experience, just some stuff around time.
Well, you know what I think, I think again, I mean, the cool thing was that this was, and I forget the exact months, but it was probably 2 or 3 months from the time that Ty told us that to the time that we spoke to the elders and then the deacons and then the church, you know. And then, I mean, the cool thing, and I was completely 100% on board. Dudley was coming out a couple of months later, and it was a cool thing for both of us to be able to say, okay, Ty's dad, Dudley, who previously led NCMI, was going to do the handover. And so initially for me, I mean, it's like, you know, Ty was incredibly gracious, where right at the time he said, okay, but, you know, treat TK as if he's leading the team, as if he's leading the church. I think I've got maybe a little bit of an over-exaggerated sense of government, and I knew what I could put my hands on and what I couldn't, even though, you know, there were some things that I knew I could only do once the official transition had happened and once Dudley had laid hands on us. But I tell you what, that timing gave us, man, it gave us time to pray without, in a real sense, the real kind of weight of leading the church, you know what I mean? So I wasn't having to really pray about what's going on in the life of the church, but just was able to spend heaps of time saying, God, what do you require in the next season, you know? So that actually when the transition happened, we were able to hit the ground with our feet moving, you know? Yeah. So I think that timing, again, that timing again, man, I think is absolutely critically important. The timing of when you start the process and what that process looks like until the handover.
And in your situation, from the time you felt like you heard the Lord, and then obviously working through that to the time it was the official handover, you know, Sunday where they're prayed for. I mean, what was that for redemption?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly. Okay. Forgive me. It was probably a few months. But here's the thing about timing is that TK was already an elder in the church who'd been governing with me for 4 years or whatever it be. Right. So people knew him. So it wasn't like I had to bring him in, and it was becoming more obvious and so on. So that was a lot easier. And that's why I think we could hurry up the timing. Not forced. It just was becoming obvious. I think that's why, you know, it's good to have NCMI team input, because they can pick, and if you don't partner with NCMI, whoever you're partnering with, you really need outside input who get what's going on, who understand what's best for the people and the sheep, who want to see this thing succeed, and to be honest, have no dog in the fight, except to see the church thrive. Because then they can come in with perspective and not emotion, and actually understanding and say, look, this is too long, this is too short. Some hold on too long, thinking they're caring more about the sheep, but actually they care about themselves. They just can't let go, and they're killing the sheep. Others are like, I don't want it to hold on too long, so we just offload and you killed it. So that's why you need someone coming in who's objective but has a heart and is building with you. You can say, listen, your timing, if you stay another 6 months, it will destroy it. If you go, or hey, no, you need to hang in there. This isn't the sheep. I don't feel like a sheep already yet. And it's eldership. It just becomes more signs that you recognize rather than this is how it works. And again, if you're going to bring someone from the outside, I mean, honestly, that's going to determine a whole lot how quick this can happen. Do your elders connect? Do your sheep connect? Do they, are they connecting? And if they're not, then either it's the wrong guy or the timing's off and you're just going to have to wait. So it is determined by this. I can't know exactly how the timing went, but it was easier for us because he was already there working through.
I would say it was probably right around 6 months.
Yeah, maybe
probably
6
February,
months.
March. Not
when I talked to him, but when I said to the elders, hey, I feel. Yeah. And even then we put it out to give TK time. We could have done it sooner.
So obviously there's more time added to that, to the point where you kind of just recognized, you know what, I think my time is perhaps coming.
Yeah, and then even the official thing, because then you got to say, okay, we get it. Now our people have to. And again, honestly, the sheep first. So that's the most concerning. And so not too long. You can't put it too long because it's unfair on the next guy, but you can't do it too short because it's also unfair on the sheep and the next guy. Right. And so I think it's got to become rather obvious than a shock. And that's where you look in God speak. God, let the sheep come and say, hey, there's a season. And we have that season shifting people, and they don't know what they're saying, but we know what they're saying. And God's beginning to bring those frustrations. The cloud's moving. Guys are sensing something's happening. And to be honest, I think the majority needs to be on board. Not the minority and not everyone, but the majority. And when the majority of the leadership's on board, the majority of the elders on board, the deacons, if you have them, the majority of the church, that's time to say, okay, this can happen. Not everyone has to be on board, but the majority should be on board. And I think training, you've got to be training. You can't just, the timing's great, and then you should be training and teaching into the life of the church. We did that. Clouds moving, God's moving us. You know, prophetically readying the people that something's happening. You don't have to tell them what, but something. You've got to be preparing the sheep. That's what a good leader does. You don't just abandon. You don't hang in there and hope God does it. You've got to be intentional. New season, this is what God's saying. Let's highlight readying the church. And then the transferring of how you go about it, you know. It does determine by how the people respond. Sometimes it takes a while where you lead together and you give them a little bit of responsibility. So for us, again, you know, one of the big things for us in America, as many of you who pastor would know this, that Easter is probably Christmas and Easter are our biggest meetings. And biggest church attendance. I mean, that's kind of the Super Bowl they keep saying for churches. And so I actually got TK inconspicuously, but I was doing it for a reason, to actually preach at one of those. It was either Easter, which is our big, and people were like, gee, why is TK? But I also wanted to see how the people would respond, because he was always preaching when I was out. I wanted to see how they'd respond. Also, I was giving him some of the big rocks to make a statement. So when I do make this announcement, people are like, not, gee, where's he? Who's he? You know? So I think it's just little by little, more responsibility. Don't just say, cheers, it's yours, but actually working this process without making any declaration, but statements from those things, the wisdom in that. And I think if you partner with a team, they can help you in some of how that looks, and giving them some profile and some preaching and governing and leading meetings and all the stuff you do. Let them make more decisions in your meetings. If you're going to make a decision, go to them and say, hey, I want to do this in this meeting. Are you good for it? Not that they start thinking, why me? But actually you're trying to get their perspective. Or I think you've got to, the staff, leadership training, get them to do that. So what we did was, we always did leadership training, but I began to get TK to do more. Although all our elders did some stuff, I was getting TK to train with me. Right. And people were like, well, if they were wondering, that's why I was trying to be intentional. Okay, now why is he teaching and not all the elders? You know? And it was all this stuff of actually being proactive in trying to actually ready the sheep for this big announcement. Yeah. And my point in this also is to, in our transferring, make them look good. Right. I think this is the real danger. We want to go in a blaze of glory. So we want to make it, look at this, and our building, our elders, look how many churches we planted, look. And we were under that pressure, to be honest. Yeah. But God spoke to me. I believe this because my dad did this with us, and I've transitioned before. And we just handed and said, hey, make them look good. Give it to them. Let them make. Even though those decisions were in the pipeline, let him look like he made that decision. And God, I mean, it's not to make him like, wow, but people say, gee, this guy's got credibility, rather than, gee, Tyrone was good. What's TK going to do? And my dad did that with us. He made it really easy. He set us up for victory. And that's what I believe being intentional is. And so make the other guy look good. If there's some big decisions that you could make that make you look good, rather let the other guy live with a success story and you go looking not as good. It doesn't matter. He sees it, and it's not about what people think, right. You know. But it does help the people around that, you know. And then the announcing and the telling, I think you just, again, not a one size fits all, but it's a big deal how you announce it. We should go through the 3-4 questions we've answered, the why. Get up and preach. Why? Why are we doing this? Why? Transition is good. It's good for you. It's good for them. And it's good for me. People want to know it's good for me, not good for him and them. They want to know this is the best decision. Tyrone can't do both. So yeah, this is right. We see it. Makes sense. Then the how. Talk about how we're going to transition. I lead, they lead, we lead, and then eventually he's leading. And however that, again, there's many ways of working there. Involve the NCMI and the team. Get the deacons involved. Get the elders involved. Get them on board. And then set a date. Now this is a big deal because I'm working through some guys right now they don't want you to set a date. And I'm like, you have to have something to aim for. You can't just, we're going to do this. Set a date. This is the date. And then work towards it. And somewhere, and again, I'm not giving how long, but tell your people like in 4 weeks' time or 6 weeks, no longer than that, because how do they hang on? Right. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. People can't wait if you make big announcements in 6 months' time we're handing over. They're like, no. So I think 4 to 6 weeks or something like that would be good to say, hey, in 4 to 6 weeks, not to your elders and deacons, you got them on board now, to the church. Make an announcement, preach around and say, hey, we're going to in 6 weeks' time or 4 weeks' time, why, how, when, this is the date. And if I can just say quickly, and then I want TK obviously to make some comments around this. The danger in transition is that people want to honor the new guy, but they don't want to dishonor the old guy, the sheep. So when you make an announcement, they don't know how to respond. They want it, yay, but they're like, oh, is he okay? So here's what I want to say. The guy handing over should say, if you want to honor me, the best way is to honor him. Celebrate this as we do. The other thing is, I think the ideal is you have a last Sunday of the lead guy who is handing over celebration, where he gets to minister, where you love on him, where people can come and do whatever they want to do. And I know we get embarrassed by that. We don't like to celebrate, but actually people need that. Because how can they celebrate him if they haven't celebrated? So I think not the same Sunday. It's wrong. Absolutely. Guys do the handover and we've got to do it all at once. The last Sunday is the Sunday before you do the handover. And you say, that's his last preach as the official. Not ever. I hope not ever. That's probably what we should talk about after this. But the thing is, as the lead guy, so whatever he wants to cover, and if he's a good leader, he's going to present the future and the new guy and thank him for, and not get all emotional, preach God and Christ. But also you're going to say, okay, and then that's when you can come and love on them and do whatever, and people can honor if they want to do all that. So there's a cut there. So the next Sunday, the guy who does, and for us Transition, you should get a team guy in to come and do that. It's not like you get up and do it, and get the guy to come in and do this thing, and there's honor, but it's now about the future and the new guy. It's not about what was. You've had that, people have celebrated. Now they don't feel bad, they can celebrate the new guy. And so that Sunday of a handover should be all about where we're going, the new guy, and handing him the mic. But the team guy who you've got involved should help you in that transition of talking about. So there's got to be a celebrate and a celebrate, and you can't say it on the same. It's unfair on people. Right. So if we just think like that, I know we don't. We're like, oh, we want to honor, but there's no honor. Honor is celebrate it, good stuff, awesome. And that guy, the next Sunday is now it's about the next season and the future. People have had a time to mourn and grieve and celebrate, and now rejoice and not feel they're dishonoring you. What do you want to say about that, bro? Any other stuff?
Yeah, I think that is good, and we touched on it earlier. I'm not sure if this is where we land in, but
yeah, we can into
I'll take. Excuse me. I think that Taz picked up on this thing, and we picked up on it earlier. The thing of mutual honor. Yeah. I think there's an atmosphere created when we do exactly what he said, and that's how we did it. We had a last Sunday where we honored Ty and Nicole, where we put up a little video of people thanking them, because not everybody could get to them. But there's that moment where we can celebrate the last 5 years, honor the leadership, whatever. But I want to say this. Whether the guy is staying in the church or not, it cannot stop there. Yeah. It cannot stop there. That's a moment, and moments are cool, but we don't live in moments. Yeah. We live with culture. We live, a word that Ty used earlier, values. And let me tell you, man, if we've got a value of honor, culture of honor, mutual honor, it creates something where, like for Ty and Nicole, they are still in the church. I trust they're happy. I'm his pastor. I trust that him. But I mean, their kids are involved in the church. Their kids serve in the life of the church. They stand up front with me in worship. They've got access, and cool to see them coming through and speaking on the microphone and praying. And even had one of his boys do a 10-minute preach on a Sunday morning. Joel leads a connect group. You know what I'm saying? It's not like, like he said, it's not. Okay, so that was the season to honor, but now we're done. Yeah. Sit there, be quiet, don't want to hear from you. Yeah. Just, you know what I mean? It's not that at all. It has to be this mutual thing. Yeah. I want to say from my side, from Ty and Nicole, Sandals and I have never, ever felt anything but love and support and cheering us on, and you know what I mean? And that's publicly and privately. Now we hang out a little bit, and sometimes we talk about things, and like we said, the heart is the same. Sometimes the way we've worked that out has been a little bit different. But again, when the culture is there for mutual honor, like when Ty's talking to me and saying, what about this or what about that? It's not in a questioning way. It's not questioning my authority. It's not questioning an authority, but not questioning his decision. It's just like, hey, but talk me through that. Yeah. He's still so invested in the life of the church, and I love that. Love the fact that our friendship carries us. That it's same heart, even when we work it out differently, it's still same heart. It's still friendship and relationship and mutual honor, So for me, this has been, and again, personally, I've been through transitions, I've seen transitions. For me personally, this has been a great transition. Yeah. And hopefully that's why I was invited to be part of the videos.
Well, actually, yeah.
I do have one question. We've talked about a lot of transition from someone to another. But I wanted to touch on once that's received and taking it forward. By the way, he mentioned sandals, just so you know, that's his wife, Sandy.
And the shoes he wears.
And the shoes he wears, yeah. Now, so what were some things that you did? Obviously, he's working on the transition to what I would say set you up for success going forward. But what were some things you did behind the scenes to prep so that when you received that, you took the bull by the horns, or you just took the ball running and were able to take it forward from the very beginning?
Yeah. Well, as I said, I think in that whole transition period, when we made the announcement to the church, I think it was a God thing, but strategically, Ty took a couple of weeks of vacation. So although I was in all sense and purposes leading, I wasn't governing as the lead guy yet. That was a personal thing for me. But it gave me heaps of time to pray. And so there were some critical things in that time period that I believe God spoke to me about, which actually became our first preaching series, if you remember. I think we called it Stepping Into Our Future. It's not walking out of our past, it's taking our past with us, but there's some new things. And so we preached, I think it was 6 or 8 weeks or whatever it is, on some of the things that we believed God was asking us. And to be honest with you, if there were 8 things, 7 of them were probably reminders. And that's part of that thing of like, gee, there's a foundation here. Do you know what I'm saying? We've got our own voice, and God is speaking to us. But I think that part was critical for me, was being able to pray and then being able to say on that very first Sunday, okay, God has spoken. This is where we're going as a church. These are some things God has asked us to focus on.
And then one other question I had was in regards to, as you've received it, you're leading the church forward, and just in that process, you feel like, you know what, we did some things this way, I'm just going to fine tune it a bit, and perhaps there's some where you just feel like, man, this one thing, we do need to make a kind of a directional shift. How do you go about, just very practically, of communicating that to the church? Again, still wanting to honor what has been done in the past, but knowing that, okay, in this area, I feel like God's leading me to go this way.
I think the answer to that is the same as the transition of the church, because I think with any critical decisions in the life of the church, and for us, those are discipline, direction, doctrine. There's a process to work those things out, and so the exact process that Ty went through, it's first an eldership conversation, and it's first processing with the elders. This is what, and to be honest with you, I every now and then I get around people that are like, I hear God all the time, and I'm like, just for me, I'm like, I think I heard God. Let's talk about this.
Feel like it.
You know what I'm saying? And so I think it is that process again. It's like, gee, we need to have a discussion with the elders. And at that time, it wasn't you and Andrew who I've since brought on. It was the guys that I served with Ty. Right. So they're very aware of the past. They're very aware of why we made those decisions in the past. And now we're starting to say, okay, this is what we feel like God is speaking. What does that look like? How do we outwork that? Right. Honoring the past, honoring the past leaders, But how do we work that out? Because we're this team now that God has called for this season to lead us into this future. Right. So we have to be able to make those decisions. You know? It's never just a case of like, okay, we're done with that, and that's really, I think, where sometimes conflict and confrontation can come in. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Tim, just on it, I think the benefit of the doubt, you've got to trust, and you've got to, the guys. Plus, if you have a history, which helps, which is one of the things I said, the guy's got to know the context if you're bringing him in. I think what's been good for us, TK knows why we did what we did, the majority of it. He was part of us decision making. I have a history with my dad, so leading NCMI, I know why we were doing what we're doing, and I also have the access to go to him and say, hey Dad, well TK had times, why did we do this? Yeah. I want to get rid of it, but I need to know why. And he would be like, no, this is why. And I'd be, okay, so it is seasonal, or actually no. Yeah. Now that I understand why, we can tweak it, but we want to stick with it. Right. So that's why if you don't have history, bro, it's a dangerous thing to just cut. See, what we devalue, the next generation has no concept of what we valued. Right. And so it's like we can just, so I think that's where it is. And I think, just to honor TK at times too, he's come to me and said, hey, this is what we're feeling. It's not, and it's not personal. I mean, if you take anything personally, you can't transition. But he would say, hey, we're going to adjust this, and we're going to do this, and it's not, and he didn't have to do that, but I think that's honor. Rather than me sitting in a meeting and make a big decision that's totally against what, rather we've chatted, he's not got my permission, but he's let me know that's honor. Yeah. And I can still question and say, hey bro, it doesn't make, but again, that's honor rather than, on major stuff, not on, even like elders and that, he's talked to me about you guys coming on and that, and not my permission, but perspective. And so I think that's the relationship you've got to have. So you can't be best mates to do that, because some guys don't have that relationship. We're blessed in it, and my pops, but I do think you've got to have that open communication. And I think while we talk about mutual honor is the key to it all, also over-communicate. Yeah. I mean, if I've seen the discouragement, the disappointment when it comes to transition, is because they haven't communicated. Yeah. And that's why if it's going to happen, I've said to a guy, call me in. If you're going to hand over a church to another guy, I want to come in. I'm going to ask you, what are your expectations? And I'm telling you, tell me everything. Even if they're unreal, don't have them and not let us know. And I'm going to say, what are your realities in that expectation? And you just got to hash it out. And the best way is not to have any expectation. But I think a lot of guys carry that disappointed because it's not, expectations are not met. And it's because we haven't communicated. And so I know it sounds pathetic, but to honor means to over-communicate rather than presume. Because presumption is the downside of this thing. And I think we have to over-communicate in major decisions and in roles and responsibilities, you know. And I think that's where we've had to say, okay, because I'm staying here, I lead NCMI, so he's on my team, I'm not on any of his teams, but I'm based in it's just like weird, how do you do this? So we had this discussion as how do we move Tyrone from being the father of this work to obviously some role, but more a gift to this church. And so that's the conversation, how do I move, not cut me out, but how do I now become more a gift than just a father or ex-elder or whatever. Sure. And I think we're still trying to work it out, to be honest, because there's no this is how, but we've got to make it work, because more guys should be able to hand over and stay rather than have to go because there's no future there, or they're a pain or whatever else. So, but it comes to communication, it's not judging heart. Right. Yeah. Let's have a full-on conversation around this without questioning. Just, okay, no, I don't see it like that. I didn't, you know, that's you've got to trust in that. So it does come down to trust. But then if I can just end with it, my thing, and say, listen, when you hand over a church, from my side, you hand over a church. And again, some guys must stay on eldership. That's another whole dynamic. Sure. Other guys might leave. That's another dynamic. But let me just say, regardless, when you hand over your church, you hand over your church, which means they're no longer your elders. They're no longer your sheep. They're no longer your deacons. And you don't have access to them like you did before. And the way to honor is to go through the guys. So if I want to talk to you, I'm going to say, like not as a friend, but I'm going to say, and I've done this, TK, I just want to hook up with, I'm honoring what God's called us to honor, so God can honor, and this thing can be done right. So it's you when you walk away, you walk away. Sure. And not that there goes everything, because you hope mutual honor is, no, it's all yours still, but it's not presumed, and it's not been be owned, it's more given rather than taken. Sure. And you'll never abuse it if it's given. If you take it, you abuse it. And if you can't honor leaders, you'll abuse your followers. That's the bottom line. Yeah. So mutual honor, talk, communicate. They're not your sheep. They no longer belong to you. They're not yours. They never will. And actually you walk away. And let me just say, they owe you nothing. They owe you nothing. And if you live in that space, anything you get is an added bonus. Sure. But I think it's the best way to live in this thing, and to be honest, talk, but don't give your disapproval. Just speak honestly. So, because it's miscommunication is probably the downside in any transition. Absolutely.
Two things real quick from my side. You know, I think when I serve, and I still serve on a team that Tyrone leads, but when I was on the eldership, for me, my understanding of accountability, real simple. I simply worked with this principle. If Ty's surprised by something he hears about me, I haven't been accountable. So I want Ty as the lead elder on the eldership team. I want him to know what's knowable, you know. And I do the same thing on the translocal team. But what that led to for Ty and I was, again, this thing of over communication. So we communicate real easily about these things, and for me that's carried through in the transition. The second thing I want to say this again, just to honor them. Man, I know they are engaged. Do you know what I mean? I know they show up, prayed up. There's been times that Ty's out of town on a translocal trip or whatever. and Nicole's got a prophetic word, and she's on the microphone, you know, and I love that. They're not just, they're like, hey, we led this thing, now we're spectators.
Right.
Yeah, they haven't been that.
Right.
They're active in the life of the church. As I said, their kids serve. I know they are praying for us. We feel it. I know they are a constant source of encouragement in our ears. So for me, those are very helpful things in transition. Very very healthy things. I think that's been a huge part of the reason why this transition has been healthy.
Yeah.
Well, guys, Tyrone, TK, thank you for again sharing your heart. This is the final segment of the Leadership Roundtable on transition. Be sure to check out those other segments, and I would encourage you, if you know others that are going through this that might benefit from some of the wisdom shared here, please do share it. Share the podcast or the video, and let's all help each other. So thank you very much for watching or listening, and until next time.